We're going to have a conversation today with Nick Denton about Gawker, about comments, about the web. And this is a very appropriate venue for it. Nick and I actually met at South by Southwest for the first time. We were doing math. It was probably 10 years ago, maybe more. And actually, the context is useful for the conversation we'll have. We jumped in the cab with a lot of the team that had made Blogger. Ed Williams, Mike Moran, a lot of folks that had made some of the original tools for blogging. I had known of Nick from a company he had done called Moreover, but didn't know him. Hopped in this cab, and our mutual friends had mentioned that I lived in New York, and Nick was talking about at that time considering moving to New York to start a media company that would become Gawker. And it was really interesting. He was talking about how blogs could be aggregated. There was the idea of how news would evolve, and my thinking was, I don't think I've ever sat next to a millionaire in a taxi before. I was really excited. I wonder how much this guy is worth. And then the other thought I had was,
I think it was much less than you think back then.
But that was, yeah, that's like, this is true. And then the other part I was really excited about was, is this guy gay or just European? So I've always been in the target audience for Gawker and many of the Gawker sites, and I thought that was a really nice evolution. And we got to see those kinds of questions answered.
Being yourself often mistaken for gay and European.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So it was a very, it was an auspicious beginning. And then less than a year later, in a bar in East Village, you showed me the first versions of Gizmodo and Gawker. Gizmodo, I think, it launched first. And what was striking was here was it looked like a blog, but it had ads on it. I'd never seen a blog with advertising on it, and that was mind-blowing. And
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, thanks for that. You really
took a wrong turn.
But here's the striking thing, is that idea alone was considered radical, that blogs were media, and we should take them that seriously. And here we are 10 years later, we've got all the sites out there. Look at, Gizmodo, Gawker, Kotaku, Lifehacker, I can do these from memory now, Famer, as my blog back in the day, Deadspin, Jezebel. There's an amazing portfolio of sites here. How many of you have never read a Gawker site? All right, 2 hands. And how many of you have regularly seen one, like, let's say a couple times a week, or at least every day? Right, almost everybody. And that's an amazing thing to have happened in about a decade. And I'll start actually with, there was a segment on Rock Center on NBC News last week. And they talked about Gawker as if their audience was kind of from space. Right? So they said, there's a thing called the internet. On the internet, there are websites. One of them is Gawker. It's a place where you read about news. But the descriptions from afar sound nothing like the sites that we recognize. So we're just starting with, what is Gawker? What's Gawker mean? What are these sites?
This is a story so old I've gotten telling. I'm sure people are bored hearing it.
We'll punch it up.
I used to be a journalist. I used to be a journalist for the Financial Times and The Economist. And I was struck by how the conversations that she had with other journalists after deadline were way more interesting, sometimes gossipy and sometimes shallow, were way more interesting than what would appear in the newspaper the next morning. And that was the initial impulse behind, I think, a lot of blogs at the time. It was the story behind the story, and we turned it into business, and that's still very much the central principle. It's what do we think, what do we know? Don't consider too much before you put it down on the page. And the danger that we face, and we get into this when we talk about comments, the danger we face is that we have become a media company, and we've developed some of the habits of a media company.
And to be clear, for today's conversation, we're going to start talking about Gawker. We're going to do some Q&A because I know people have a lot of questions about Gawker as a company and how different sites. And then we're going to dive deeply into the topic of comments, which is really the focus for today. And I assume, obviously, we're going to talk about comments, and we're going to have questions about that as well. One starting point, though, is so much of the brand is, gossip and the story behind the story. But I look at the portfolio sites. If I look at Lifehacker, I look at IO9, I look at Kotaku, even Jalopnik to some degree. These are nerd sites, right? Either car nerds, sci-fi nerds, whatever the hell Lifehacker nerds, email nerds.
Are you saying nerds that don't like gossip?
Well, is there gossip? If I'm writing, like, here's my new to-do list, and here's the engine in this new car.
Look, gossip is just news. Gossip is just the news that you really want, as opposed to the news that wins prizes, or the news that you're told you should read, or that boring report about some political shenanigans in Albany.
So by that reckoning, the sort of Gizmodo iPhone 4 leak is the perfect gossip story.
It's a great story, and we don't want to be judged by the American standards or J school standards of what news is. So if we were to come out and say we are a news property, we have a collection of news property, then I think we'd be judged by standards that we're not very interested in. The only standard that we care about is to entertain and inform our readers and to tell the truth. Even if it's messy and dirty and scummy.
But isn't that the exact same thing every other media site says? Or don't they all say we care about the truth? Is that really the same?
Well, we don't say it. Probably shouldn't say that. It's a dangerous thing to claim to be on a mission to seek out the truth. I think ours is a particular version of the truth. It's like, can you handle the truth? Are you ready for the truth? It's a bit of it's a challenge as much as
it's a few good men kind of thing. You can't handle the truth.
Do people really want all the truth? Sometimes they do. I think most of the time as readers they do. Yeah, as colleagues of somebody they don't. The great power story, the iPhone story. Right. That was actually a great example. Because there you had an entire community of many geeks who felt some sympathy for. Great Power was the engineer who lost the iPhone in the bar.
The guy that left it in the bar. Right.
And we not only exposed the iPhone, but we exposed him, and we exposed the whole story of the poor dude who left the iPhone in the bar. And readers love that story. It's a fantastic story. You get to see the iPhone 2 months early. Steve Jobs gets really pissed. And it's a fantastic human story. But they also think poor dude in the bar.
But they thought you were jerks for outing the guy, right?
I think anyone who was a geek felt, okay, this is a fellow geek. And actually, in fact, anyone who's a human being felt. this is a fellow human being.
Are you asserting that your audience is human beings?
But everybody people love stories like that. They love them and they hate them. They feel sympathy for the subject, but they want to read the story.
So some of the goal is you got to feel a little bit dirty about how much you like the story.
I think the real goal is that we knew who he was, and should we have kept that quiet? Should that have been in the old world? A story like that would have been passed around by journalists to other journalists. It would have stayed within the elite. It would have gone round and round. Everyone would have used it as currency. And still now in politics and in celebrity coverage, the same thing applies. That people keep the best stories for themselves. They don't want to publish it out there. And the truth of the matter is that blogs were supposed to revolutionize that. Blogs and actually social media were supposed to democratize. They were supposed to level the playing field, to take all the stories and make the reader as informed as the writer.
Right. So when the White House press corps used to know that John Kennedy was philandering, they kept that story for themselves. In the modern Gawker world,
it still happens. It still happens way too much.
Okay. So related to that, one of the I think more interesting recent breakout examples of that was Brian Williams' comments on Lana Del Rey. So we got to have this conversation. The background is Lana Del Rey was on SNL. She was fairly poorly received, and you are friends with Brian Williams.
Who was friends?
Right. You solved that problem. Well, talk me through how it happened from your perspective. What was the email you got?
So we weren't friends. We were acquaintances. We'd had dinner a couple of times. As you can tell from his persona on television, he's really charming. He's a charming dude. And he started emailing. He'd email tips. Most of the stories that appear on Gawker sites come as tips from people. And they come as tips, actually often from other journalists. It's the stories that they can't run themselves, they're too dainty to run. That they want to see it out there, because all journalists are gossips, all gossips are journalists. And he sent me this note about the Lana Del Rey outing, saying it was the worst outing ever on SNL. I forwarded it because in the email, context was why hasn't Gawker written about it yet? So I forwarded it to the editor of Gawker, intending it as a rebuke for our lack of coverage. And he, rebuking me for my celebrity friendships, published the email on the site.
And now you and Brian are no longer friends.
Well, I have a voicemail from him which I haven't listened to because...
Why haven't you published it? What? Why haven't you published it? Listen to it. I want to hear it.
Play it now.
Play it down.
You're tempting me. I won't get any page views out of this. So
The video will eventually go up on the site. But that is an interesting thing, is there is something intrinsic, and this actually leads into the conversation about comments. There are times when the site is oppositional, antagonistic towards everyone from the sources that it covers, that it quotes, the people who give tips, to its own staff. You've had people air out their dirty laundry on the site. And then, obviously, sometimes toward the reader and the audience and the commenter. Right? There's all kinds, there's a lot of different points.
there's a lot of conflict.
Yeah, there's a lot of conflict, a lot of antagonism.
Not on every site, like Lifehacker and I are the nicest sites you can ever
Lifehacker, everybody's hugging each other. But generally, the brand is this sort of this confrontation.
There's a spectrum, and yes, at the Gawker end of the spectrum, there is conflict.
Well, and how you sell ads, right? The reason it's a business is advertisers like this is kind of sexy, confrontational.
Yeah, I think our original tagline was unhealthily obsessed. We were not trying to sell ourselves as purveyors.
So if there's that much tension, confrontation intrinsic to the brand, can you ever have a good conversation on the site?
Have you ever had a good conversation with people who just agreed? It sounds like the most boring conversation on that.
Sounds like San Francisco.
A good conversation involves disagreement. It involves disagreement which is hopefully expressed with weight and intelligence. It involves disagreement.
Well, so there's the question, is the wit and intelligence sufficient to bring people up to a conflict and to have a productive conversation? Or are they all...
Are we switching over to the comment part of the...
I think we will momentarily. Actually, why don't we do that before we do that? If there's questions about Gawker Media as a whole, about the various sites, before we dive deeply into the conversation, I'd love to see if there's anybody...
This is your last chance to ask about the redesign of 2011.
Oh, yeah. Actually, let's briefly talk about that, so people can line up here at this microphone.
I can't believe we just did that.
Yeah, well, it's old news. I didn't think you covered old news on the site, but we'll go to it. About a year ago, actually it was longer than a year ago, you started talking about this redesign, and it was challenging the tyranny of the fact that blogs are always the newest thing on the top. And you used the iPhone story example as a book for this. That was the most important story. You had to stop putting other stories up on the site.
Yeah, we had to stop publishing for a whole day in order to keep it at the top of the site. Right.
So your solution to this was change the layout of the page so you can pin a story in the main area and then still have that column on the side. How is that working?
We went down by about 25%, actually for a bunch of technical reasons. We messed up our Google indexing. But we got it all back and we're probably about 20% above where we were.
Well, some of this though is you didn't actually have to change anything. You could have kept on with the same design and sometimes stop publishing in order to promote good stories. Why did you want to make that radical change to the site?
I wanted us to devote our attention to editorially and in terms of design to our best stories and our work. And I think you've seen in the last 12 months, putting aside all the numbers which have shown a rebound, we're probably below where we would have been, but we're way back on where we were. The biggest change, the biggest improvement, I think, has been the quality of the stories. That one of the reasons why that Brian Williams piece went up was because it was Monday morning and AJ, who's the editor of the Gawker, who's a new editor of Gawker, didn't have anything else for what we call the splash for the front page. He didn't have a shocking story. And
so you want to fill that big spot with something compelling.
Well, when you're running a blog, you just throw out some volume. You don't have to think about having a story that's so compelling that you're going to try to win the internet every single minute of the day. if you have a splash, if you have one dominant story, then that's a big, it's very stressful for editors, but stressful I think in a good way, but it puts pressure on them to come up with stuff that's worthy of the slot.
So that's interesting. And one of the other questions that comes from the read side is, you actually went very technically ambitious. It's got all this kind of HTML5s, kind of different types of scrolling. It's much more, excuse me, much more complex than any other standard blog had been before that. How much of this is, do you want Gawker to be a technical company? Do you want to be inventing technology now? You've made a lot of tech.
I would like us very much to fix or help to fix the problem of discussion and comments, because it's a complete problem.
So just discussion and comments.
That's our main focus.
Well, and one of the reasons I ask is early on, your prior company before Gawker had been more over, and early in the days of Gawker wanted to build a news aggregator. That was a big part of this. Actually, I won't ask about Exploit because you and I probably won't be able to remember this thing, but I think
you're going to date yourself.
Yeah, well, I don't mean to dwell in 10 years ago, but
I've moved on.
Well, no, I think it's an interesting time because there was a very fertile moment at the genesis when Gawker was born. People trying to build new tools, build new technologies. Most people, when they do a new startup, are trying to atone for what they screwed up in their last startup. Right? So your last startup did a lot of interesting things around RSS and aggregation. And so do you still have an itch you want to scratch around solving technology for how blogs and RSS are going to work?
I think it's certainly true. People try to solve the same problem again and again and again, and if they're lucky, they get closer to solutions as they query goes on.
Right.
And
but you're not doing that.
What?
But you're not doing that.
No, I think I mentioned.
Okay.
If you think about Kindred, which is
yeah, so Kindred was the
long lost project that
was the one of the first projects.
And Matt Hamer is here in the.
But it was a very interesting experiment around aggregating blogs into a news experience.
So this actually goes back to Blogger. It goes back to Blogger and cooperation between Blogger and all over. Remember the news Blogger?
Yes. Yeah. So by way of explanation, ancient history for people, Blogger, before it was Blog, like we built a partnership with an extent company moreover, made a tool called News Blogger that was essentially what today we call reblogging. You could read a bunch of blogs, read a bunch of news stories, and post them all into your own aggregation. These days, you can do that on Tumblr with a couple of clicks, but it was very ahead of its time. Very interesting. And how close is that mimic your process today, what your editors do?
I want good conversations online, and I guess in the late 90s, when we met, there was still a hope that online one could capture the, this sounds like ancient history, one could capture the intelligence of the readership. That the web would allow writers and readers to collaborate on the stories. I like this idea of something I call iterative reporting. That would be reporting where you could, instead of saving up, doing all the research and saving up the story, and then publishing it in one big dump, you would put out your notes. Your notes would be exposed in public, and the sources would help you
So you have this living story with all the notes and everything about it.
That didn't happen. It didn't happen. It's a promise that it was. It's a promise that has so not happened that people don't even have that ambition anymore.
Right. They forgot that was even
the idea of capturing the intelligence of the readership. It sounds like a joke.
Yeah. How many of you like YouTube comments? Show of hands. Actually, I mean, and we were talking about this earlier. Curious about what are the traits, what are the adjectives you would all ascribe to comments on the web? How many of you think web comments you think intelligent, vitriolic, insipid, lowest common denominator, right? Like, so it's really interesting, the sort of the responses. I think we got a question here.
Hey, Nick. My name is Jim. I oversee the blog sales of the New York Times. So traffic's gone up by 20%, but how much of that is attributed to the design versus the general increase in consistency in posting, or just even the redesign as a process for projection?
And I don't really know, to tell you the truth. It could be a bunch of things. It could be a rebound after a self-inflicted wound. it could be just the fact we have some of the best writers and editors around. Our tech performance is actually excellent at the moment, so sites are very responsive. There's a whole bunch of factors. It's very hard to disentangle.
In general, like your posting is much more rhythmic, more consistent than seems to be a trend.
You think?
It seems like image quality presentation as opposed to sound. I was just trying to separate those two.
The image quality has improved a lot. I don't think people care that much about image quality as readers do. I think advertisers care about the visual look more than readers do. There are plenty of successful sites that have got ugly.
So that's a really interesting question too there, is how much do you think design influences content and vice versa? If the sites were simpler and less pretty, would they be as compelling just because of the content?
No, I'm going to pass on.
Over your opinion?
Hey, my name is Brian Keller. I'm Director of Experience at Euro or CG in New York. And I was really heavy into the Docker comment community a few years ago, where we had the commenters balls and we would all meet and kind of know each other. And occasionally some of the writers would come and we had like a star moment. And I actually won comment of the year winner. But anyway, my question is, it wasn't